Matthew Brady, we think, was born in 1822, maybe 1823, in Warren County, New York. Very little is known about his early life. We think he was the son of a farm man, and in the late 1830s, he sort of arrived on the photography scene. By the mid-1840s, he was the proprietor of a really successful studio at Broadway and Fulton Street. And he became very, very well known for his portraits of the great and famous. He was very good at getting famous people to sit for him, and then he used their name in his advertisements. When the Civil War came along, he was convinced that the camera could record something that perhaps nothing else could record, that war could be recorded in a way that had not been recorded before with a camera. And he lost, I guess you could say, a great deal of his own money in outfitting photographers and sending them into the field to document all aspects of battle. After the war, he couldn't interest anyone in buying these negatives, not even the United States government. Now, of course, we have government photographers, but in those days, photography was such a new thing that no one envisioned documenting war on this scale except for Matthew Brady. We're so used to taking our little 35mm cameras out and making snapshots. It's so easy now. In those days, generally speaking, your negative was the size of your picture. If you had a negative that was this big, your picture would be this big. If you had a negative that was this big, your picture would be this big. It's largely contact printing that we're talking about. So for the big 19th century pictures that we see, that are sometimes this big by this big, the negative itself was a piece of glass that was this big by this big. And I can tell you, they were heavy, they were awkward to handle. You also had to develop them and expose them when they were wet. You had a solution, a wet colloidal solution, with which you coated your glass plate. While the plate was the proper wetness, you put it into your camera. You had to expose it within a certain period of time and then take it out within a certain period of time, or the whole process would be ruined. This was a big job, and often in Civil War pictures you'll see the little photographic darkroom, which is basically sort of a black little tent that these men had to take into the field. They were shot at just the way war photographers are shot at these days, only they were incredibly conspicuous because they had to have either someone to help them or an animal, such as a horse or a donkey, to help carry this portable studio. They literally had to have their whole studio with them at the time. And when we think back on it, that Brady or anyone did this kind of work at all is nothing short of amazing. About the only documentation, real first-hand documentation there is for Brady's last years is a series of letters that were written on Brady's behalf to his nephew in Washington, D.C. At the end of his life, Brady's eyesight was very, very bad. In fact, it had been very bad for most of his life. He always wore very thick glasses and had a hard time even writing his name. And it's very tragic because when he did die from a kidney ailment in 1896, he was literally very, very alone. When one of his friends examined his effects after Brady's death, he found that there really wasn't anything worth sending the family other than a ring that Brady had been given by the Prince of Wales. The letter, that particular letter is just tragic because it mentions that the suitcase is so broken, it wasn't worth sending. The shirts were so old, they weren't worth sending. The coats were so old, they were given to charity. And 2 handkerchiefs that someone had sent Brady while he was in the hospital were probably taken by the nurses. And it's a very, very sad end for someone who was the reigning American photographer for the greater part of the 19th century.